Imagine a world where every aspect of your life is dictated by an intricate set of rules and regulations, where your status in society determines your rights, your opportunities, and even your clothing. Welcome to Victorian England, the era of Queen Victoria, spanning roughly from 1837 to 1901. The rigidity of this class system was such that your birth determined your fate. It dictated what jobs you could have, who you could marry, and how you were treated by others. Books like Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management became Bibles for the middle class, offering detailed instructions on everything from serving tea to attending a party. For women, knowing and adhering to these rules was crucial for maintaining a good reputation. Public health campaigns were launched to raise awareness about sanitation and its impact on disease prevention. The importance of personal hygiene became more widely recognized, and basic practices like regular bathing and hand washing were promoted. People were expected to present a respectable and orderly image to society, even if their private lives were far from perfect. Gossip was rife and could make or break a person's standing in society. Every action was scripted, every word weighed, and every gesture scrutinized. For some, this provided a comforting structure and a clear path to success. For others, it was a stifling cage that crushed individuality and ambition. Whether you were born into the gilded cage of the upper class or the harsher realities of the working class, Victorian life was a tightrope walk between duty and desire, decorum and passion. It was a time when society's demands were at their zenith, testing the limits of endurance, morality, and the human spirit. The fear of being judged or ostracized by one's peers was a constant concern. This pressure to conform and maintain a pristine reputation led to a culture of surveillance, where people were constantly on guard against any misstep that could tarnish their image. Any deviation from the expected behavior could result in social ruin, especially for women. For them, their reputation was intricately linked to their value in society and their ability to secure a good marriage. A scandal involving a woman could not only affect her own standing, but also that of her entire family. This intense scrutiny was part of a larger social structure that enforced rigid norms and values. People were expected to know their place within the hierarchy and not draw undue attention to themselves. Doing so could disrupt the social order and invite gossip and criticism. Therefore, conforming to the norms and maintaining a low profile were essential to survival in Victorian society. This led to a culture of hypocrisy, where individuals could hold strong moral convictions in public while engaging in questionable activities behind closed doors. For example, many members of the clergy who preached about the importance of morality and abstinence were known to engage in extramarital affairs. Similarly, some members of the upper class who championed the cause of the poor often exploited their workers or neglected their own children. This double standard was not limited to any particular gender or social class. Men and women alike participated in this charade, driven by the desire to maintain a positive public image and avoid social disgrace. The separation of public and private life allowed individuals to enjoy the benefits of respectability while engaging in activities that would otherwise be frowned upon. It created a complex social dynamic where people were judged primarily on their public behavior, regardless of their private actions. However, this increased attention to cleanliness went hand in hand with a preoccupation with moral purity, especially among women. The ideal Victorian lady was expected to embody purity and innocence, and any deviation from this standard could lead to social disgrace. This concept was reinforced by the popular double entendre, clean in person and in conversation. While it might seem straightforward today, during the Victorian era, it carried a deeper meaning. It meant not only being physically clean, but also maintaining a morally pure lifestyle and avoiding any impropriety in speech or behavior. The Victorian obsession with cleanliness and morality extended to the home as well. A clean house was seen as a reflection of a woman's virtue and the moral order of the family. Servants were often employed to maintain the spotless condition of the home, which was necessary to uphold the family's reputation. This emphasis on cleanliness was part of a broader social movement aimed at improving public health and reinforcing traditional gender roles and moral standards. It was a time when the boundaries between physical and moral purity were blurred, and maintaining a squeaky clean image was essential for social acceptance. This etiquette extended to every aspect of life, including how one sat, stood, ate, and conversed. Clothing, manners, and even the way one walked could convey messages about one's background and standing in society. For women, this meant donning restrictive corsets, large bonnets, and long, cumbersome skirts. Men, too, were not exempt from these sartorial standards. They were expected to wear waistcoats, top hats, and shirts with stiff collars. This attention to detail was not merely a fashion statement. It was a way to signal one's respectability and adherence to social norms. The importance placed on appearances created a culture of comparison and competition. People, especially those in the middle class, felt compelled to keep up with the latest fashions and trends to avoid appearing outmoded or inferior. This constant pressure to look one's best could be financially draining, as staying fashionable often required purchasing new garments and accessories. Furthermore, the emphasis on appearances extended beyond clothing. The way one carried oneself, the furniture one owned, and even the type of carriage one rode in were all scrutinized by society. For example, eating soup with a spoon was considered improper unless one used a specific technique to ensure no droplets escaped the lips. Similarly, leaving a calling card after a visit was a must, with the specific wording and presentation holding significance. The obsession with etiquette often created a sense of artificiality in social interactions and placed an undue burden on women, who were typically responsible for upholding these standards in their households. The upper class, consisting of aristocrats and wealthy landowners, enjoyed immense privilege. For women of the middle and upper classes, finding a suitable husband was a primary focus. Men, too, had to adhere to a strict code of conduct when pursuing a relationship. The process began with an initial introduction, often through a mutual acquaintance or friend. After expressing interest, men would then formally ask for a woman's hand in marriage, usually with the consent and involvement of her family. Women, especially those of a higher social standing, were rarely allowed to be alone with a man without a chaperone, typically a parent or older relative. During courtship, flirting was done subtly with the use of fans, gloves, and coy glances rather than direct expressions of emotion. Physical contact was limited, and any display of passion was considered inappropriate. Despite these constraints, love marriages were not unheard of, but they often involved considerable negotiation between individuals and their families. The double standards of the era were evident as premarital sex was scandalous for women, but men's sexual experiences before marriage were often seen as a rite of passage. They held significant political power, lived in grand mansions, and had access to the finest education and leisure activities. The middle class, which included professionals, merchants, and small business owners, occupied a somewhat precarious position. While they aspired to emulate the upper class, they were often seen as social climbers, a term used to describe those who tried to move up the social ladder. This aspiration led to an obsession with etiquette and appearances among the middle class. Meanwhile, the working class, primarily employed in factories and mines, faced harsh living and working conditions. Their lives were marked by poverty, long hours, and limited opportunities. Social mobility, although possible, was difficult and often fraught with societal disapproval. This period was a time of immense social change, rapid industrialization, and a growing awareness of class disparities. Living under these conditions meant navigating a complex, rigid web of expectations that govern nearly every aspect of daily life. So here are 8 things that were normal during the Victorian era. Before we begin, remember to give us a thumbs up and support us. Number 1, class was everything. Victorian England was a society sharply divided into 3 classes: the upper class, the middle class, and the working class. Number 2, strict gender roles. During the Victorian era, gender roles were strictly defined and enforced. Men were expected to embody stoicism, rationality, and strength, while women were seen as the epitome of purity, domesticity, and submissiveness. Men were often encouraged to pursue careers and provide for their families, while women were primarily confined to the domestic sphere. A respectable woman's role was seen as wife and mother, and she was expected to prioritize her family's needs above all else. This societal pressure led many women to view marriage as their ultimate goal. Women were also prohibited from certain occupations deemed inappropriate, such as working in factories or engaging in politics. This wasn't just because of societal expectations, but also due to legal restrictions and the fear that women's presence in the workforce would drive down wages for men. Number 3, etiquette was paramount. The Victorian era was highly concerned with etiquette, the customs and rules that dictated proper behavior in society. No. 4. Courtship was a choreographed dance. Courtship and marriage were deeply entwined with social expectations and rituals during the Victorian era. Number 5, cleanliness was next to godliness. During the Victorian era, there was a growing emphasis on cleanliness and hygiene. Number 6, appearances mattered deeply. During the Victorian era, appearances mattered deeply in judging an individual's character and social status. Number 7, public and private life were separate. During the Victorian era, there was a clear distinction between public and private life. Number 8, everyone was watching. In the tightly knit communities of Victorian England, reputation was a prized possession and a fragile one. In conclusion, living under Victorian social rules was like performing in an endless play. Welcome to my channel. Today we're twirling our mustaches and adjusting our corsets because we re-off to Victorian England where people are dying. Debutantes are debuting and Queen Victoria is reigning supreme. Last time we talked about how sex, death, and class obsessed the Victorians. In the Victorian era, boys and girls were educated differently, and girls were generally set up for failure. Death was a regular occurrence in the Victorian era, and there was a lot of etiquette around how to die and how to show your grieving. Even if you didn't go to church, you probably knew someone who did, and their experience was pretty typical of Victorian religious life. If you were part of the working class, you most likely worked long hours in a factory, mine, or as a domestic servant, often in dangerous or exhausting conditions. Your wages were probably low, and you had very little bargaining power. And if you were injured or sick, you were on your own. Imagine your nosy neighbor judging your every move and gossiping about it with fellow members of your church congregation. Beneath the surface of tea parties and lace curtains lay anxieties about propriety, morality, and survival. We hope you enjoyed learning about life in the Victorian era. If you want to learn more about this fascinating period, check out our other videos on Victorian England. Thanks for watching. Well, that was everyday life for Victorians. If you were a woman, you were constantly watched. So if you laughed too loudly in public or walked alone, you would be ostracized by society. Men who frequented the wrong clubs or spent too much time with shady characters risked their reputations. If a family was accused of impropriety, their entire social world could collapse. So everyone had to constantly worry about what other people thought of them and try to live according to their expectations. It was a real buzzkill. Middle-class men were expected to work hard and climb the career ladder, striving to increase their income, prestige, and honor. Women of all classes were discouraged from work. They should only work if they were widowed or unmarried and poor. But the rise of the middle class led to more rigid ideas of respectability. Historian Kathy Davis explains that respectable women were supposed to behave modestly, cover their bodies, and avoid anything that suggested sexuality. She goes on to say that working-class women were judged more harshly than middle-class women who engaged in the same behaviors. Also, everyone kept an eye out for signs of immorality, poverty, or political radicalism, because if you were labeled as a troublemaker or a threat to the social order, your life could turn upside down. If you were a Christian, especially an Anglican, you were expected to attend church regularly, be on good behavior, and contribute to charity. Even though Victorians pushed hard for purity, propriety, and godliness, many of them lived double lives. We know that today because they wrote about it in secret, like in letters and diaries. They also hid evidence of their naughty behavior, like love letters or receipts for risque items. And many of these items ended up in the hands of historians who discovered them. You see, brothels flourished even as preachers of decency held forth from pulpits and sensational novels. Ghost stories and risque publications were secretly popular. Homosexuality, while criminalized, existed in hidden communities. And respectable people sometimes acted out against the grain. Author Judith Flanders writes that a lady might have laughed loudly in public or walked alone to prove that she wasn't afraid of anything. These acts of defiance were rare, but when they did happen, they were usually met with severe punishments. So maybe they seemed harmless, but they weren't. And that's just scratching the surface. Of course, Victorians were sinners, but they tried to hide it. Just like today, people rarely admitted to being bad, but they also took their religion seriously. In Victorian England, moral conduct was tied to spiritual salvation. Sinners would burn in hell, and the worst sins were sexual sins, which corrupted the young and disturbed the social order. Sex outside of marriage was a huge no-no. And if you were a woman and had sex before marriage, you were judged harshly and harassed by society until you found a husband. But remember, sex was also taboo in marriage. So couples had to hide their passion and wait until they were alone to get busy. Victorians believed that lust was sinful, but it was also dangerous for women because it might push them over the edge and cause them to have a baby. Having babies was great if you were trying to start a family, but if you were unmarried, pregnant, you would bring shame upon your family and ruin their reputation. Since science didn't offer many explanations for why people did things, religion filled the gap. And Victorians saw themselves as on a mission to convert sinners and save their souls. It was even fashionable for wealthy women to tour the slums, handing out religious tracts and money while judging those they deemed less fortunate. Victorians saw poverty as a sign of moral weakness, but they also felt a Christian duty to help those in need. They just made sure that people knew they were poor because they deserved it. They called these people deserving poor, and those who were undeserving were people who were lazy, drunk, or had made choices that put them in their situation, like having sex before marriage. People worried about how they appeared when they died, whether they were surrounded by the right people, and whether they died in a virtuous and painless way. Funerals could take weeks and involve body viewing, embalming, and multiple ceremonies. And if you were a widow, you had to mourn for 2 full years. During that time, you had to wear black and follow strict codes of behavior. You couldn't laugh, cry, eat rich food, wear colorful clothing, or show any sign of joy or sorrow. You also couldn't remarry. In fact, you weren't even supposed to socialize with your friends and family. By showing no emotion, Victorians thought you proved that you were a good, God-fearing person who accepted their fate and didn't hold any anger towards God. And if you were really devoted, you even gave up luxuries like coffee and tea. Good thing you don't have to do that today, right? Victorians took death so seriously that they sometimes wore jewelry made of hair from dead loved ones, and the mourning clothes industry boomed. Victorians believed that boys were rational beings whose brains developed later than their bodies, so they needed to be pampered intellectually. Girls were considered more sensual and emotional, so they needed to be married off before they got too wild. Until the end of the era, boys were sent off to boarding schools where they were taught the classics and prepared for careers in law, business, or politics. Girls stayed at home and were taught accomplishments like sewing, music, drawing, French, and just enough reading to run a household or appear interesting. They were also taught to be wives and mothers and told that anything more than that was unnatural and unappealing. Historian Ellen Carroll Dubois explains that too much intellect in women was considered unfeminine and even dangerous. What? Girls weren't supposed to get ideas above their station and ask for more rights. That would disrupt the social order. Most working-class children had little or no education until laws slowly made schooling mandatory in the late 1800s. Those who did attend school were taught rote lessons and often faced harsh punishments like corporal punishment. And today we'll learn about life in this era if you were alive back then. Here's what a day in the life would have been like. For our first topic, I'll talk about domestic life because the home was the center of social life and the site of major social anxieties. If you were a middle or upper class woman, your main gig was running a home that brought glory to your family name. Historian Elaine Scholter explains that the ideal wife aimed to produce a peaceful, well-ordered home that harmoniously expressed the status of her husband, the head of the household. So you were judged on how clean your house was at all times? For heaven's sake, you wanted to make sure your house looked presentable in case an unannounced guest showed up. After all, your husband's reputation could be harmed if word got around that he had a slovenly wife. You were also judged on how moral and orderly your children were, which was extra hard if you were higher on the social rungs since you were expected to have servants. This put a lot of pressure on wives to not only run a spotless house, but also raise kids who knew proper etiquette and didn't disgrace the family. Many middle-class and upper-class households employed maids, cooks, and governesses. But having servants meant that you had to monitor them like hawks to ensure that they understood their place. Servants also had their own hierarchy and were expected to follow the mistress of the house as orders without question. Servants who stepped out of line were fired immediately and expected to leave the premises right away. Plus, you never wanted your servants to make you look bad. So you tried to treat them kindly so that they wouldn't gossip about you behind your back or, heaven forbid, steal from you. It was also key to maintain a clear separation between employer and employee. Servants were expected to be invisible. As author Stella Tilliard puts it, they were supposed to be efficient and cheerful, but never allowed to speak unless spoken to. No eye contact, please. Ideally, they shouldn't even be noticed. But now let's step out of the home. For our next topic, we'll talk about education and intellectual life. Next, we'll discuss death, mourning, and morbid etiquette. For our next topic, let's talk about religion and morality. For our next topic, we'll talk about work and class expectations. And for our last topic, let's discuss hypocrisy and the hidden life. Finally, let's wrap this up with how judgmental people were. In conclusion, to live in the Victorian era meant living in a performance that demanded you constantly consider your social standing, gender role, and the approval of your community. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to look at 22 things that would get you shunned by Victorian society. Women who engaged in premarital sex risked being labeled a whore or a fallen woman, ruining their chances of marriage and social standing. People were encouraged to marry for reasons of duty, social standing, or financial security. Marrying for love meant choosing happiness over societal expectations. Men were criticized too, but the shame was heaped primarily on women. Before we begin, remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our videos. Let's jump into it. Now, 1. Getting pregnant before marriage. Sex before marriage was not just frowned upon, it was scandalous. Men and women were expected to be modest and reserved when in the presence of the opposite sex. Holding hands or hugging as a greeting was inappropriate. Being rude, crude, or impolite could result in being shunned because it disrupted the social order. Wearing the wrong color, fabric, or style for a particular occasion, or worse. Copying someone else's outfit could result in being noticed for the wrong reasons. Even having friendly relationships with members of the opposite sex could lead to gossip and suspicion. Showing too much skin, whether by wearing a low-cut dress or a short skirt, could be scandalous. It was believed to tempt men and corrupt the morals of the community. The Victorian era was strongly influenced by Christianity. People were expected to be devout and moral. Those caught gambling or drinking excessively could be banned from social events and have their reputations tarnished. It was believed to attract the attention of fortune seekers and those looking for fame rather than genuine talent. Female performers were seen as particularly vulnerable to exploitation. Crime was widespread in Victorian England, but committing any crime, especially violent or sexual offenses, would have serious consequences. Not only would you be punished by the law, but you would also face shunning from society and be labeled a criminal for life. Questioning religious norms or engaging in multiple acts of worship was looked down upon. Atheism was a particularly taboo subject. Suddenly, the middle class could buy clothes and furniture that mimicked the elite. But this created pressure. You had to appear respectable even if you were in debt. Lateness was seen as lazy, unreliable, even sinful. There were strict rules about when to visit friends. Never before 3 p.m. and never stay longer than 30 minutes. Daily life, especially for women, followed a rigid structure. Morning prayers, scheduled walks, tea times, and endless needlework left little room for spontaneity or relaxation. Polished shoes, embroidered handkerchiefs, and fashionable bonnets became subtle weapons in the class war. Writers like the Bronte sisters and George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans challenged gender norms. Victorians were deeply conscious of legacy and reputation. They wanted to be remembered as moral, respectable people. Obituaries, gravestones, and portraits emphasized virtue and duty above all. This made people anxious to do the right thing at all times, even when no one was watching. Oscar Wilde mocked the hypocrisies of Victorian morality until he was imprisoned for his homosexuality. Working-class movements like the Chartists pushed for voting rights and better labor conditions. Many others rebelled silently, writing forbidden diaries, reading improper books, or carrying on hidden love affairs. For children in upper and middle-class families, childhood was often more about manners and morality than happiness. They were dressed like miniature adults, expected to be quiet, polite, and obedient. Affection was often discouraged. Victorian parenting prized discipline and restraint. Did you find this video interesting? What do you think we missed? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and share this video. If you enjoyed it, check out these videos next. We'll see you next time. Working class children, however, had a brutal existence. Chimney sweeping, factory work, or street begging were common ways for them to earn money before child labor laws were established. Their emotional needs were rarely considered. Children were often seen as moral projects to be shaped rather than as innocent joys to be cherished. While literature flourished during the Victorian era, certain books were considered too risque or controversial to be discussed in polite company. Many people, especially women, suffered from mental illness, but it was misunderstood and hidden. Women with postnatal depression or anxiety were often declared hysterical and institutionalized. Respectable people kept family scandals tightly under wraps. A disobedient daughter might be quietly sent away to avoid scandal. In Victorian times, personal grooming and appearance were crucial indicators of social status. Those who did not take care of their appearance, such as having dirty clothes or unkempt hair, could be judged and ostracized for looking like they belonged to the working class. A young woman's entire future could be ruined by rumors, an improper letter, or an unchaperoned outing. Courtship rituals were filled with secret love letters, hidden glances, and coded behavior. Love was not straightforward. Engagements were legally and socially binding. Breaking one off was considered disgraceful. These included works with sexual themes, critiques of religion, or discussions of social issues like poverty. Number 2, marrying for love. While romantic love was glorified in literature and art, marrying for love was still considered risky. Animals were seen as messy and a potential source of disease. They were also associated with lower classes. 3. Being too friendly with the opposite sex. Public displays of affection were not common in Victorian times. Number 4, having lots of children. Speaking loudly or expressing opinions too freely could be perceived as uncouth and invite criticism. While large families were common, having lots of children, especially when they were sickly or frequently died, could bring shame to a family. It was seen as a burden on the mother and the community. Many families practiced some form of birth control, though it was dangerous and often unsuccessful. 5. Questioning religious norms. 6. Performing on stage or in music, acting and performing arts were seen as somewhat disreputable professions. Number 7, not being polite. Politeness was highly valued in Victorian society. 8. Breaking fashion rules. Dressing inappropriately could cause quite a stir in Victorian times. 9. Gambling or drinking. Gambling and drinking were viewed with suspicion and could lead to addiction, poverty, and ruin. Number 10, showing too much skin. The ideal woman in Victorian times was seen as delicate and pure. Number 11, reading improper books. Number 12, owning a cat or dog. Keeping pets was relatively rare in Victorian times, especially among the middle and upper classes. Number 13, not taking care of appearance. Number 14, speaking your mind. Repressing emotions and speaking softly were seen as signs of self-control and good breeding. Number 15, committing a crime. Number 16, childhood was often harsh unless you were rich. Number 17, the role of secrecy and repression. The Victorians prized self-control. Emotional repression was a social virtue. Number 18, consumerism and keeping up appearances. With industrialization came mass production. Number 19, romance was a high-stakes game. Falling in love before marriage was both idealized and dangerous. Number 20, time and routine were tyrannical. Punctuality was a moral issue. Number 21, rebellion, quiet or loud. Some people bent the rules. Number 22, the weight of being watched by history. So there you have it, 22 things that would get you shunned by Victorian society.